Hello, yes, a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good evening to you, however you may be listening and wherever you may be listening. This is the latest edition of the Baldwin Sports Media NFL podcast coming to you after what has certainly been an eventful week in the NFL. Obviously, yesterday was the NFL schedule release, which I will be diving into very briefly because I do think that it is somewhat important to talk about and the importance of schedule release day, as it were, and the importance of the schedule. But I'll dive into that later, as I said. So yeah, this is the latest edition of the show. As always, I want to thank you very much for listening. Don't forget that if you are new, if you have stumbled upon us, then don't forget you can like and subscribe on whatever podcast platform it is that you are listening to this on. And don't forget to follow us on our social medias. We are at Baldwin Sports Media on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. And on Twitter, we are at MRB Sports Media. So feel free to give those channels and those outlets a like and subscribe and whatever it is that needs to be done on them as well. And as I always like to say, if you are a returning listener, then thank you very much, as always, for listening to this and for your continued support. Right, with that, we need to get straight into the show. And I suppose the biggest news of the past 2 weeks, because this is now a bi-weekly thing for the NFL offseason, has been the George Pickens trade. That has been the biggest, news somewhat of the NFL. And no, this obviously hits, I'm not going to say hits hard, but it hits home for me as a Pittsburgh Steelers fan and someone who has been a fan of George Pickens. I think the fact I'm saying has been a fan sort of tells you what my feelings are of it. He's been traded to the Dallas Cowboys. Yeah, it's a position that the Dallas Cowboys needed. Some thought they would have gone through it in the draft, but now they get a proven wide receiver in the NFL, and they didn't have to give up a first round pick in order to get him. They gave up some later round picks. As a Steelers fan, I think I want to take this in all sort of levels of objectivity. And again, I have liked George Pickens in the past. I wish we could have got more for him, but I agree with the decision to trade him. I think it's the saying that's been thrown around by many people around the NFL is, you can tolerate some bad behavior, you can tolerate some improprieties or whatever, so long as you are producing, so long as you are producing the goods. And George Pickens has not really produced the goods. Now, some of that is not his fault. I will admit the quarterback situation he's had to deal with has not been ideal. Working with Kenny Pickett and then Mason Rudolph and Russell Wilson and Justin Fields, all different types of quarterbacks, all different various levels of abilities of quarterbacks. Mitchell Trubisky was in there as well. So being able to find a rhythm, having to work with, Kenny Pickett, who was a rookie at the time, Russell Wilson, who's again different level of quarterback, Justin Fields, who may not have seen the ball, working with different offenses. Some of it is not his fault, but at the same time, he has not helped himself. Now, if he was a great yards after the catch guy, I think that would have helped him out because it would have boosted his numbers, and he could say, "Look, I can do this without any quarterback. Give me the ball, give me the ball, and I can do it." But most of what he does, you don't see much splash from him anymore. Now he makes great catches, no one's disputing that. But what he does afterwards, he could be doing a lot better. Is all I'm going to say. Again, he has the potential, he has the ability to do it. But when you are also factoring in, some of the disciplinary stuff on and off the field, is it worth the headache? And especially when you consider that the Steelers brought in DK Metcalf, someone who is going to be the number one wide receiver. What would George Pickens' attitude have been if he got bumped down, back down to number two wide receiver, because that's what he was with Deontay Johnson? What would happen then? It just wasn't worth the headache. Now, as I say, if some of the numbers he could have helped on his own, and some of the disciplinary things he could have done a lot better with. So I think in the grand scheme of that, again, I think it was best for all parties. He's moving on in a contract year. Hopefully he can do something with a better wide receiver, a better quarterback rather, prove that he could be a decent wide receiver, and work something out and get paid. And I do wish him well. Again, I went to his very first preseason game when we played the Seattle Seahawks. I fell in love with him within one drive. Yeah, because there was one block that he threw and then one catch that he made. As I said, I fell in love with him and I wanted him to be successful. And I do wish him well. But everything considered with the Steelers, it was best. It was best to move on. Again, I wish we'd have got more, but I completely understand the move that I completely understand the move that the team made. Whether or not they're going to regret it, I don't know. I think there is that element of them that they will, because you look at the wide receiver room. It's DK Metcalf, and then it's a bit of a drop down in terms of how far the talent level is from number one to number two in terms of wide receiver. Now, whether that be Robert Wood, whether that be Roman Wilson, who we drafted last year, whether that be uh, Ben Skowronek, whether that be Calvin Austin, whoever it is that's going to be that number two wide receiver, you know, based on who's in the room at the moment, we could always make a trade or go sign a free agent, for instance. But as it is right now, that is a big drop off in terms of talent. At least with a George Pickens as your number two, that would have bridged the gap somewhat. But it is going to be very difficult to see how that wide receiver room works out with that huge number one target in DK Metcalf, and then I'm not going to say scrubs, but the rest of the pile to work with. It's not going to be pretty for the Pittsburgh Steelers this year. I will say that. But on the Dallas Cowboys front, again, I think they've got something incredibly special because you look at him opposite CD Lamb. I think is a very very good wide receiver 1-2 tandem. I think you could put them in the argument that is a top five potential at least if he sorts his attitude out. That is a top five wide receiver 1-2 duo in the league. I still think it's Jamar Chase and T Higgins number one, but they are certainly in that conversation to be in the top five. And I think there's a chance for them to do very, very well, and for him to do very, very well in Dallas. But those are just my thoughts on George Pickens and the big move that happened over the course of the past couple of weeks. And with that, we move on to subject two. Now, this is something that I was probably going to talk about anyway, but given the traction it has gathered in the past couple of days, thanks to Mike Greenberg, I think it's only fair that we discuss it here as well. And that is his idea, again, not his idea, I'm sure many people have discussed it, contemplated it in the past, of bringing in a draft lottery for the NFL. Now, he did this on the back of the NBA and their draft lottery. And I'm not going to go into the rigging allegations, but the fascination that came out of it when the Dallas Mavericks, who had a 1.8, 1.6, very, very low chance of winning the number one seed, won the number one seed, won the number one draft pick. And that gave, credence to the idea that tanking is not always worth it. If you are a team that is trying to, lose games at the end of the season to increase your chances with the lottery picks, it's not always going to work out. So you might want to win because at least then you've got something, and maybe it keeps the fans interested and whatever, rather than just admitting from the start of the season or midway through the season that you are done. Now, Mike Greenberg's got had some pushback on this, and I don't think it's justified. I genuinely think an NFL draft lottery would be a very very good idea for the league. Now, I made this point on Twitter yesterday when I saw someone made it. I just wanted to get my thoughts out there, but I can sort of expand on it a little bit more here. And they were basically pointing out that the NFL does not need a bit of a boost when it comes to the ratings or the in terms of their scale. People saying that the NFL would need a draft lottery to make it more entertaining to drama views. That's not in discussion. But what I think the NFL wants to do, and you have seen this with the way they have gone about things, is they want to dominate the sports news cycle 365 days a year. You look at, the schedule release, which again we'll touch on. It's a big thing now where they announce the schedule. Teams have fun with the videos. It is now a thing where ESPN are having a whole night debate devoted to it. That's for the schedule release. That is something that is not really of consequence. So this is not to give the NFL a boost. They don't need it. But an event like the draft lottery would just act as another big event in the year that they can sell to networks. Imagine what viewing figures Fox or CBS or ESPN or NBC or the NFL network, if they want to keep it in house, could drive for a night of that. And then you think, the advertisers and whatever. That would be a huge night in the NFL calendar. Quite when you put it, I don't know, maybe. But again, but back to what I was saying is they want to dominate the sports talk year round. That's why they extended things like the NFL. That's why extending the NFL season by a week gives them another week into February where they can be talked about. The Pro Football Hall of Fame game, playing that brings the discussion in the preseason back a little bit. The draft, the combine, making these big events big, and getting eyes on the NFL and giving people storylines to talk about. Now imagine what would happen in March, say. I'm just trying to find it like a good midway point. So after the combine, but before the draft. That's around the time when the NBA season really kicks into gear because that's the playoff push. Then the NFL comes in, and you've got the draft lottery, and all of a sudden you've got a week long discussion of programming of who's going to win the draft lottery or what are teams' chances. It would be huge. And again, you're lying if you say that you wouldn't want to watch an NFL draft lottery night. If you are one of the teams that has a very good chance, you'll want to know. And if even if you have that small chance, even if you're not involved, you're not telling me that you wouldn't watch that drawing, especially if there's a big name coming up, like Arch Manning, coming up for this year, or going back in past years. Who's going to win the number one pick when Andrew Luck came out, or Trevor Lawrence came out, or Caleb Williams came out, or any of these other star players that could be generational in the league? Just think about how much that changes everything. And again, you can still do things afterwards. You can still trade away the number one pick if you know what's coming up, and if the team that's number one doesn't need a quarterback, they can still, trade away their picks. Go for it. To give themselves chance in the later rounds, in later years. Go for it. You can still do that. But the jeopardy involved, I think, would be good, and it also would dictate the play at the end of the year, because all of a sudden now teams are going to want to be competitive because there is no incentive or no guaranteed incentive to lose. Because yes, you can decrease your chances or increase your chances rather by decreasing your wins. But if it's not a guarantee, who's to say that you quote unquote give up in week 15 when you could still try and be competitive, try and play spoiler for someone. Get those veterans that want to get more reps in rather than wrestling for the past. Do that because you never know. The draft lottery might not be in your favor. So I think it is genuinely something that is worth discussing. I think it would be a huge event that people would tune in for. You saw the numbers for the draft this year, and again, for in those little chunks for 10 minutes at a time, that spot is irrelevant for 30, no, not necessarily 31 other teams, because you're thinking who's the quarterback to get taken, then which quarterback is my team going to take. But for the vast majority of teams, those 10-minute windows do not mean anything. Now imagine a whole night where the whole league is impacted, or the vast majority of the league is impacted. No, take away the playoff teams, but then everyone who doesn't make the playoffs gets put into the lottery. Everyone then has a chance. And again, it gets rid of you know the incentive to tank at the end of the season and the incentive to rest, which I think everyone can agree is bad for the league. Again, you look at some of the product that gets put out when you are down to your third string quarterback because you're resting the first one and your second one gets injured. It's not good. Play the starters a little bit longer. So I think it would be huge for the NFL, and I genuinely do think that it is something that they should consider. But what do you think? Do you think they should bring it in, or do you think they should keep things as they are? Let me know in the comments down below, or again, reach out to us on our social medias and let me know what you think. Right, now talking about the NFL and wanting to dominate the cycle for all the days of the year, we now know what a lot of our days are going to look like in the autumn and the winter because the NFL did release their schedule last night. I'm not going to go through all the details. There are and I haven't exactly watched every single team's video schedule release. I've seen some of them. I've heard news about all of them. I'm not going to break down every single one, but kudos to every single team for. I think someone's called it's the social media Super Bowl where every team tries to win and you can see the effort that goes in. And I really do love it and appreciate what goes on. So kudos to them. And again, kudos to the NFL for making it a big thing. And I do want to say a lot of people sort of discourage schedule release day. There's the jokes of or the comments that you're going to be who you're playing. With the schedule rotation, who you're playing basically the day after the end of the season. Why does it really matter? And I think knowing the order does really matter. One, I think for the fans because it gives you a chance to at least plan out roughly if you want to go to games this year, especially for us international fans being able to say, right, to get flights and hotels and everything booked so many months in advance is perfect for us. But also for the players, and I believe it was Ryan Clark. I don't want to say it 100%, but I'm 97, 98% convinced it was Ryan Clark that said it a couple of years ago. And he said it, from a player standpoint, you want to know what your schedule looks like for, you know, for a couple of reasons. But the main one he brought up was when the Steelers and the Ravens were at their peak in terms of rivalry, in terms of physicality, you wanted to know what you were getting before and after a Baltimore week. And I'm assuming Baltimore were the same thing, before and after Pittsburgh week. Because he was saying you ideally want a bye or the Thursday night game so you get the mini bye either the week before or the week after a Baltimore game. You know, you want a bye week or the mini bye Thursday night before Baltimore so that you can be rested and 100% ready for what is going to be a physical battle, or you want your bye week afterwards, so you want be able to give yourself 100%, be really fit, be extra physical because you've got that extra week to recover. And at the same time, if you're playing Baltimore, you don't want to play anyone on Thursday night because you're still not going to have recovered. So I think the order of games really does matter. We can go on about strength of schedule and, you're playing the teams, you've got to play whoever it is you schedule sometime. But I genuinely do think the order and whatever for fans and players really does matter. And again, the NFL decides to make it into this big thing. Now, I'm going to give two takeaways because there are a couple of things. Again, I'm not going to go into every single team's schedule, but two things really struck my attention, got my attention rather. The first is the Minnesota Vikings. Now, they are playing back to back away international games. Now, this isn't necessarily new because the Jaguars have done that as well. They've been the road team one week and then the home team the other week for when they do their London games. The Minnesota Vikings are going to be doing it. They're going to be playing in Dublin against the Steelers in week 4, and then they're going to face the Cleveland Browns in week 5 in London. Now, I think this is pretty big for one reason, and that is the possibility of the NFL and the European division, which has been talked about a bunch of times. Now, I don't think an NFL European division is going to work. Numerically, it's not going to work because then you've got 36 teams. So would you then have to add 8 teams to make it equal across the two conferences? And then how does that work with the with the playoffs and everything? Because then you're working with 40 teams. I don't think it would work, but let's go with the argument anyway. There has been talk about an NFL European division. I think the smarter thing to do would be to have an NFL Europe, relaunch that, especially now with the increased popularity. I think that could work again if they went with it. But let's say they are going to go with the European division. This is going to be a good test to see what happens for the teams that would have to jump across the continent of Europe in quick succession. Again, we plenty of examples of how teams organize logistically when they do road trips. If you're sake of argument, if you're the Patriots and you're playing the Seahawks on the road and then you're playing the Cardinals on the road, rather than coming back to Boston for that week, you'd stay on the West Coast and train that way. Now we get to see what happens when there's international factors involved. You know, passports, logistics of having to get things, across an ocean. Can teams do that with all the equipment they've got to take? You can't just pack it in trucks. You got to pack it in trucks, and then you got to get a ferry. Are they gonna send up, buy two lots of equipment and have one set up in the UK already, whilst the in London rather, whilst the other lot goes back to America for them to use? We don't know. There's a whole bunch of things that are going to have to, they're going to have to be worked around with this. So it will give the teams a bit of an idea of how it could theoretically work. Again, if you wanted to do it, how would a team in France, if there's a Paris team, if they've got to go to London and then they've got to go to Dublin, how would that work? Or if they, again, Dublin to London, or Dublin to Munich, or Munich to Rome, or whatever. How does the international factor play into all this? That is what I think is going to, that's what I think is crucial for people to sort of work out. And I think that is why they've done it. I did mention on Twitter that I think the Vikings would have requested this to an extent, or may have requested this, because I remember when I covered their game against the Saints in 2022 in London, one of Kevin O'Connell's big regrets was they came too late. They didn't really have a chance to enjoy the week. Now they're going to be able to do that. So I think that was part of it. But I do think the NFL looked at this and had the opportunity and said, right, let's see if we can make this little thing work. We can tinker with a few things little by little, season by season, get the analytics, get the data, see if the players are happy with it, see if the logistics work, and then go with it. I think that is why they have done it this way. Now, I could be totally wrong. I could be, putting two and two together to make five. But I think when you look at how the NFL have approached the international games in the past and all the various factors that have got into it, I think this is just another example of what they're trying to do and trying to make NFL in Europe permanent and make it work. And this is just another experiment that they're using. The second point that obviously comes out of the NFL schedule release is the fact that the Kansas City Chiefs are dominating with 7 primetime games. I don't think people can really or should really be shocked by this. This was always going to be how it works. Everyone talks about, the fact that the Dallas Cowboys have got the most, the joint most primetime games also with 7 kind of says something. There's the America's team factor with them, but the Chiefs, they are the, they are the dominant team. Yes, they are not the Super Bowl holders, but they are still the dominant team in the NFL. So, and they are the team that everyone wants to watch, whether it be the Taylor Swift factor, whether it be the Patrick Mahomes factor, screw it, whether it be the Andy Reid factor. I like Andy Reid. Who doesn't love Andy Reid? Whatever it is, they are now the team that gets put on TV. Same way the New England Patriots would have been, statistically, I don't know the numbers right off the top of my head, but the New England Patriots would have been exactly the same during their dynasty years. So everyone talking about, is this a culture shift? No, not really. It's just the fact that they're the biggest. If the Philadelphia Eagles go and win another Super Bowl, which I think is not really out of the question, then you'll probably find next season or 2 seasons time, they'll have the most primetime games because people want to see the winners. People want to see the best teams. So that's why they get put in prime time. And I saw the graph. I think it's the Cleveland Browns and the Tennessee Titans. I think are 2. I cannot remember for the life of me who the other one is, but they don't get primetime games, but the good teams do. So I don't think anyone should really be shocked by what has gone on with that. So it's just the way it is. And finally, the other bit of news that emerged over the past couple of days is the fact that Derrick Henry has got himself a new deal with the Baltimore Ravens. Obviously, had a great year last year. Some arguing that he should have been MVP. I think there was a bit of a case for that, but didn't. But still, incredible season for Derrick Henry, and now he gets rewarded with a new 2-year deal with playing money guarantee. I think what is crucial here is the fact that they have given him is that he has been given a 2-year deal. And I think that is pretty important, a 2-year extension rather, because obviously with his age, and the way he plays, there's always the risk associated with running backs. I think with Derrick Henry, it is, the risk is always there, and even more so with Derrick Henry. But I do think that there is that potential for him to be an anomaly, as it were, when it comes to the physicality of running, just because of the way he's built. Like, he can take those hits. Smaller backs like Le'Veon Bell, for instance, were never going to last the way he played, and indeed he didn't. Derrick Henry, though, I think because of the physicality, I think there is a huge chance that he could be one of these running backs rather that is still very, very productive into 34, 35. He's 31 now, so with the extension going into those age. But I think that's a pretty good deal, and I think a very smart deal for the Baltimore Ravens to do. Get the extension, but somewhat in the middle in terms of what he could have got. Because if he'd have got a little bit more, I don't think many people would have argued. But the fact that he got 30 million total, 25 million guaranteed, just about bridges that gap of paying him what he's worth, which is better, higher than all the other running backs, but not too much that he creeps into wide receiver territory where if it does prove that he is like any other running back and he drops down, that it's going to be painful for them. So I think a very good deal all round for both of them. And finally, before we go, as always, I like to round off with a fun story of the week, and this one really caught my eye, and it was it was a Boston University, their women's softball team reacting to drawing Oklahoma in the College Softball World Series. Now they did this. They do it in a March Madness. Again, I don't watch a lot of women. I don't watch a lot of women's softball. I don't watch a lot of softball, women, college baseball at all. So this isn't me like I just didn't watch it, but I saw the clips come across, and when Boston University were drawn against the Oklahoma Sooners, who are, I believe, the best team in the country. I'm led to believe anyway, based on the clip. Um, the reaction to all of them being so disappointed and shocked at being drawn against them, I just thought was brilliant because they do again like March Madness when the team makes it in, they pan to whatever the team is, and then there's usually some celebrate. They go into the tournament, but when Boston University found out they were playing Oklahoma, the look of stunned dejection, shock, whatever word you want to call it, was just fantastic. There was a whole bunch of a term that I've actually just been introduced to, surrender cobra, which is where you put your hands on your head, whenever your team loses or something shocking out. That moment, I'm sure everyone knows what the reaction is, but you put your hands on your head after something incredible happens. That moment, a bunch of that, I just thought was very, very funny that they managed to time it in such a way that they were able to capture that reaction from every single one of the Boston University softball players. So I just thought it was fun. I just thought it was funny again. Contrast that to what happens in March Madness. I just thought it was great, but that is it. That is the end of this show. I want to thank you very much, as always, for listening. And don't forget, if you are new, then if you like this, don't forget to like and subscribe, leave comments, and don't forget to also follow us on our social media platforms. We are at Baldwin Sports Media on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. And if you are returning, and on Twitter, we are at MLB Sports Media. I thought I'd get this right by this point. And if you are returning, then as always, thank you very much for your continued support. That is it. I shall be back once again in another 2 weeks to talk about more NFL with a bit of luck. And until then, I shall speak to you then. And until then, take care. And as always, stay safe.